All right, well, we are about at noon. So hi, everybody. My name is Don Saucier. I am the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and you are here for our professional development series. And hopefully you've been here before. If you haven't been here before, hopefully you'll come back. We have great events. And for those of you who can't make this time regularly, or those of you watching at home, we have all of these events archived and accessible on our website for the Teaching and Learning Center here at K-State. We have announcements on social media for all of these kind of things. We have lots of really cool stuff. The cool stuff we have coming next week is a session called Practicing Gratitude, a Student Wellbeing Workshop. And this will be facilitated by Chris Bowman and Greg Eislein. We're very excited about that for next week. If you come to a bunch of these, you can earn a professional development certificate, either as a graduate student or, and my colleagues have dropped that into the chat already, either as a graduate student or a faculty or a staff member. We also are proud to announce, and we've announced this before, but can't have enough announcements, our first ever Teaching and Learning Center SOTL Showcase. SOTL stands for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Will be, here I got to refer to my notes over here, will be on Monday, May 9th in Hale Library. It'll be the afternoon of Monday, May 9th. That'll be the Monday of finals week. Jason Bergtol will kick things off as our keynote as this year's Kaufman Chair. But if you've done any scholarship of teaching and learning, if you have an idea to share, a research project to share, just a concept you want to get out to people, we'll have poster and oral presentations available as well. And there's a short Qualtrics survey that you can fill out to apply for that SOTL showcase. The deadline for that is Monday, April 11th. So that's 3-ish weeks away. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us for that. So that's what's coming up. But what we have today is a wonderful presentation by Kodee Walls and her team. I'll have Kodee announce her team here in just a second on allyship and anti-racism. And I'm very excited that all of you are here to participate with Kodee and the rest of us. So thank you, Kodee.
Yeah, thanks so much, Don. That was wonderful. And it's so good to see all of you again. I know most of you from other presentations, and I'm recognizing some new names to this space. So at least to the times that I've talked. And then I would love for my colleagues to introduce themselves before we shift to me sharing the screen and the PowerPoint so we can all track and follow along together. So just a reminder, I'm Kodee Walls. I am the Assistant Director at Counseling and Psychological Services, and I will let Christine introduce herself, and we can just go down the line for the four of us.
Hello, everyone. Glad you all could be here today. My name is Christine Glendinning. I'm a therapist here at Counseling and Psychological Services. I also am the Groups and Workshops Coordinator.
Thanks, Christine. Vanessa, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Vanessa Fox. I'm also a therapist at CAPS. And yeah, thanks for having us. It's good to see everyone.
Yeah. And last but not least, Bree.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bree Pursuti. I'm a licensed professional counselor and staff therapist here. I'm also the eating disorder coordinator here at CAPS. I'm so excited to meet with you all today.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this is a norm for how I like our times with the TLC to go, I want this to feel like a conversation. What we're going to bring forward to you is an idea for the fall. So think of this like your sneak preview of an opportunity that we will get to do together if you want to stay connected or involve yourself in it for the fall semester related to allyship and anti-racism. Maybe you watched the promo video that we did, or you read some of the material, so we'll go into a little bit more detail together. But despite that, even though we're going to tell you what we're going to offer, I still want this to feel like it can be a conversation. I'll share my screen, but I'll also still have the chat available so I can keep an eye on the chat. So if you have a thought that you want to share, you can either put it there or you can unmute yourself to stay connected, because we're colleagues, we're connected, and we're moving in this work together, and we want it to feel like we're starting to build those relationships that can be meaningful. So with that, I'm going to open that up, and we good for that? Can everyone see it? Okay, thank you. And I've got the chat open now. All right. So one of the things we want us to start with is the land acknowledgement. And this is hopefully not going to be something you haven't interacted with before and maybe have read. And I won't read it aloud to all of you because sort of what we want to invite, in addition to recognizing that we are on land that was taken from Native folks, and we remember because they remember. And also want to recognize that sometimes the challenge with this reality is that what are we willing to do about it? Are we willing to give the land back to these tribes, or are we making efforts to decrease barriers to their access and their resources. Because traditionally, I think Deborah Bolton, if you've ever been in meetings with her before, she uses this phrase, historically excluded identities and populations. And thinking about what a land grant mission is, it was to take land from Native populations and create organizations and institutions for, at the time, white men. So we're still in the process of reflecting on and recognizing our history. And so we wanted to bring this in not only to recognize this situation and the location we are physically, but also to know that even with this recognition, there's still more work to be done. So another kind of question that we wanted to answer in anticipation that some people will be like, why are these 4 people who are working at the counseling center and are highly trained mental health professionals wanting to have conversations about allyship and anti-racism? So some of you may not be aware of this, but if you've ever perused our website and did a deep dive into our commitment to diversity, we consider social justice to be a significant pillar of the work that we're doing with clients. So we have a training clinic for practicum students and doctoral students in psychology who are coming to finish their doctoral degrees. And so one of the ideas with that training is we don't ever want to ask people to do something that we're not willing to do ourselves, which then means when we have to address a competency of cultural competence, diversity or multiculturalism in a developing mental health professional's identity, we then need to know that we've done the work or we're still continuing on the path to make those things happen. And it feels like a real opportunity. We've done, you know, when George Floyd's murder happened in 2019, was it 2020? Oh my God, COVID deleted a year in my brain. And I feel really, thank you, Noah, May 2020. When George Floyd was murdered, it sort of has brought about this huge understanding, and it put it in the face of lots of white people, well-meaning white people in many cases, sometimes not quite so much. But anyway, that racism, what do you know, is real in our society, and that we're not actually in a post-racial world, and that is not always safe to be a person of color in our community. So we saw this huge uptick in book clubs, because what do white people do? We're really good at doing book clubs, but how do we then take that and put it into application? And so we, as time moved forward and you know, COVID was really hit its depths and we were tired of it. And now we see conversations about Russia invading the Ukraine. It's really easy when we're not faced with it in the day-to-day life to focus on only what the news is giving us. And when the issues of discrimination and racism fell off the front page, unless you were intentionally staying engaged with that information, it's easy to forget or to not hold it in your awareness, which then makes it less likely that you're going to continue to endeavor to make changes, either into your internal experience or your systemic experience. So when we also read How to Be an Anti-Racist, we read books about internal biases. We've also focused, and Bree, you helped coordinate the book club, so please jump in what books I'm missing that we've read. Right now we're reading Anti-Racist Psychotherapy.
Yes, anti-racist psychotherapy.
Yes.
From My Grandmother's Hands, and
Biased.
Yes,
Biased. Thank you. Yes. So those were some of the things that we read, and recognizing sort of from a feminist framework as well, it's great to stay in-house, but in order to expand our circle of influence and work together. So that means reaching out beyond what we have here at CAPS and what we've worked to do to bring you all into the process, because I am 100% confident that you are all doing something in this space. But we want to kind of collaborate to move forward together and to really demonstrate, yes, Allison, we can put a list of those books in the chat.
I will do that.
Thanks, Bree. So we want to create this opportunity where we can all continue to move in this direction together, so it doesn't slip off of our radars in that experience. So, colleagues, did I miss anything? Yes. We were practicing this before, and I was like, I know I'm gonna overtalk when it's my slide, so we're gonna have an interesting time keeping track of time. So, all right.
Okay, so as Kodee mentioned, the purpose of the workshop is to engage in self-exploration and growth, and wanting to expand this to our community. So the overall goal is to begin the process of self-reflection and racial healing, acknowledging that that work is never done, and so the workshop is meant to start that process.
I also feel like probably I should have shared this from the beginning. Like I said, this is a preview for a workshop that we would like to offer all of you in the fall semester. All right, and Bree, I know that you're typing.
That's okay. I will jump in. So the structure of this workshop, we're hoping to have it be a 3 series in the fall. Each of the 3 will be about an hour. And we're hoping that we can focus on anti-racism and racial healing through education, a little bit of education, but a lot of discussion and processing thoughts and reflections. And then the content will look like, we've been going through trying to identify what we want this to look like. And we're gonna go through the following topics: exploring your racial identity, wherever that might be and wherever you might be in your racial identity development. We'll explore this, exploring your internal racism, discussing, and that will be a discussion related to how white supremacy might show up within us. And raising race consciousness, being able to better identify racism, with hope at the end to create a personalized plan for you all in how to be a racial ally, and then being able to use this in our own work on campus as well. And a lot of this content we developed through the Racial Healing Handbook by Allyship, and the next slides will break that down a little bit further.
Yeah, so as Bree mentioned, the first part of what we're going to be looking at in this workshop series relates to exploring our racial identity. Because to understand racism, we first must understand our racial identity. And in this process, we'll work to develop positive racial identities. And the reason for that is because positive racial identities means that we're secure in our own racial identity and are aware of the history of our racial groups. And we can identify when we're being racially stereotyped. And it's very different from an identity under white supremacy, and means we have spent time learning about ourselves as just racial beings, learning about our privileges, learning about our disadvantages and how our identities affect experiences of others and the world around us. And it will be most helpful to approach this work as we come upon it with this stance of curiosity, which is something that I recognize is easy to suggest, but it's really difficult to employ when dealing with race. But curiosity is much like a muscle that we'll need to exercise in order to become successful.
And part of this conversation will also include discussions around racial identity development. So for those of you who are familiar with Janet Helm's work, she was pretty instrumental in creating sort of like, not stages is not entirely accurate, because it's not like, okay, you've accomplished this level of insight, so you get to level up to this and you don't ever like go back to a different less developed or lower level of awareness for things, because it becomes, I think of it sometimes as sort of like the coming out process for the LGBTQ community. It's like you come out to yourself, right? And then you come out to your close friends, and then you come out maybe to your family members. But then the moment you leave that environment you were in, you have to then go through that process with a new group of people. Now, that is not to say that people of color or people who are white have to come out, so to speak, to each new group of people that they interact with, but kind of similarly, that it's never finished. The work is never done. Let's see. Yes. Not always linear. Researchers describe the development as schemas rather than stages. If I read my notes, I would have been able to say that a lot more effectively. So good job, Kodee. We're doing great. And then, so we'll spend time learning about racial identity development of people of color and of white people, because we want this to be a space for both people of color and white colleagues to have meaningful conversations in safe spaces. And there's still some things that we're trying to work out, because one of the realities that we know, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is that white fragility for white people when they're talking about race and racism and the impacts and the racist things that we have done to our friends and family members of color can be really activating. And what we don't want to do is to have a space where it becomes people of color having to caretake for white fragility when a white person is interacting with this information. But what we also don't want to do is just to further segregate or create some false disconnection between these conversations, because we are all in a white supremacist, racist environment. So we've all internalized these things and impacted us in different ways, but it still has impacted us. So, any questions about anything so far? All right, I can see Noah's face and he said no. So I'm gonna go to the next one. Pop it in the chat or unmute yourself, please. All right, thanks, Don.
After we move from exploring our racial identities, we'll spend some time increasing our awareness of how we've experienced racial socialization, so the messages that we've absorbed about race. We'll look at our own and how we've internalized those messages. So we'll look at our internalized racism that's operating in all of us and influencing our behaviors. And then we'll work to re-socialize our racial self, so relearn messages. So we'll use quite a few different books that we've talked about and use some work from Bobby Harrow and Annalise Singh. The primary task for this section will be to re-socialize our racial selves, and we can do that through raising our race consciousness, which Bree will talk about.
Oops, sorry, wrong screen.
Okay, so raising race consciousness has a few components to it. The first is to expand, grow, and evolve our awareness of race, and increase our awareness of how racism works as a system. We'll do that through attending this workshop that we're putting together. You can also do it through education and reading books, consuming anti-racist social media, watching documentaries, or listening to podcasts. I have a mental list in my head if you're interested. And to broaden our knowledge base, to be able to better see how racism is working as a system, because it is so sneaky and it's constantly changing. And then also connecting with other people within your own race who are also examining their internalized racism as a way to raise our own race consciousness. The second part is to claim and cultivate an anti-racist identity. This requires recognizing that one moves from non-racist to anti-racist, and the difference between non-racist and anti-racist is action. You might identify as non-racist and have beliefs against racism, and yet still stuck in what to do about that, and moving to anti-racist pairs the commitment with action. And we know that raising race consciousness is important because we need to be able to identify it in order to disrupt the flow. For example, we have to be able to understand when a microaggression is happening in order to be able to respond to it.
So the culmination of this work in becoming a racial ally is to create sort of like your racial ally plan. But it is paradoxical to the concept of self-appointing ourselves as allies, because this really undermines and belies the true nature of allyship. And I think this was really hard for, well, I'll speak for myself. I think this was really difficult for me in my allyship journey, for any kind of community that I would like to believe myself an ally to, because it's sort of like, but I'm doing these things, right? And that's enough. And I'm challenging these ideas. So then I get to be an ally, right? And that's not how it works. And it takes people from the community, and I think understandably so, being willing to take a risk on you and to vet you in a way so that it's not just this performative allyship that like well-meaning white liberals can end up engaging in, because allyship isn't a bumper sticker, and it is not an image on Facebook or like the picture circle, or like whatever those filters, that word is escaping me. You all know what I'm saying though. So, but that can be part of it, but that is not sufficient. Like Bree said, it's the action piece that it takes. And yeah, so just want to acknowledge that. And then that conversation, we will kind of confront those things of where, and this is where like the risk and the vulnerability comes from participating in these workshops, because we're going to ask ourselves those you'll be invited to ask yourself those hard questions. Whether or not you engage, I guess, will be completely up to you, but you're going to get out what you put in. So just forewarning on that part. So with this, we'll also talk about like what are the do's and don'ts of allyship, so that we're not recapitulating the harm that's perpetuated against people of color in our society. And another thing that I want to offer, and this was, I had attended APA back when it was in person. I think it was 2019. But anyway, I attended a presentation, and it was a really targeted, focused presentation on how can people in the LGBT community be anti-racist. And so one of the things they talked a lot about was challenging this idea of whataboutism, because it's so easy, right? And like, this is kind of how white supremacy can kind of be sneaky, and it can hide by distracting from what is being focused on in the moment of like, right, it isn't just, anti-racism is for all people of color. It isn't just for Asian Americans or people of Asian descent or Black or African Americans, but it impacts each of their identities very differently. And the other part is like, well, you know, the queer community has it really hard too. And like, as we see the Supreme Court justice nominee being grilled with some questions that you would have expected to see in the 90s, like, it's like, what decade are we living in? But what we want to invite people to do is like really allow yourself to focus in and be present on racial allyship. And what you'll probably find is that similar to like providing access to persons with disabilities, it's gonna benefit every community and group of people who are oppressed by the system that we live in. So.
All right. So that kind of covers a lot of what the content of this workshop series will be about. And so what I want to talk about now is how are we going to grow within this workshop? And these next couple of slides are really going to talk about how we grow and what we need to let go of in order to have the growth that we're all hoping to get. So what we have to start practicing is we have to start practicing being really curious about what comes up for us, being really curious about what we're experiencing moment to moment as we go through the workshop, as we learn about different ideas and start exploring our own identities and how that impacts our interactions with others. And to do this, to really remain curious, we have to do a couple of other things. We have to engage in these conversations and stay in the here and now of the moment that we're in. We have to not get kind of sidetracked with side conversations or other distractions like working on other projects or things of that nature, because this won't be like this passive workshop series that you can just kind of absorb information from. It's going to be a really engaging, or we hope to be really engaging workshop series. And so my challenge, or our challenge to you, is to really work on staying focused on how your racism shows up within us, and letting go of kind of fighting whether or not it shows up within us. And one way to go about doing that is to make sure that when you're speaking and you're talking with your colleagues and everyone else in our workshop series, is to speak from your own experience rather than speaking for or maybe about others. Okay, and so as I said before, there's going to be some changes that we kind of typically have to make in a group together. And so there's going to be some different rules that we have for this workshop series, because typically what we bump up against is whenever we're in groups together, oftentimes there is these typical rules such as, you know, don't judge, don't make assumptions, assume people just have good intention and show respect. Well, there's going to be some reasons why maybe some of these rules don't really make sense in the work that we do. The first off being like, as humans, we're programmed and wired to make judgments. We're programmed and wired to make assumptions. And so asking ourselves not to do that isn't going to be really possible. And if we assume good intentions on everybody as we begin speaking and communicating together, what that does is it prioritizes intent over the impact of maybe an action that may have caused harm to somebody else. And then lastly, you know, a lot of times when we're in groups together, we talk about this idea of being respectful. But respect is it's a relative term. What might be respectful for one group of people might necessarily be respectful for another. Oftentimes our ideas regarding respect collude with white culture and pathologizes anything outside of that norm. For example, white culture really values direct eye contact while talking, and many other cultures do not do that, right? So kind of this idea that respect is a relative term. But what we can do is kind of what I talked about on that last slide, remaining curious about what's coming up, staying present with what's happening, and yeah, just engaging in the here and now.
So because the work that we'll be doing in the workshops is focused on some internal reflection, focusing on what you're experiencing in the moment in those workshops, there is likely to be a lot of discomfort that could come up. And we might see a variety of different reactions. We know when our bodies encounter stimuli that appear intimidating or threatening, we can experience a physiological reaction, often referred to as fight, flight, or freeze. And the possibility that while we're doing some self-reflection, these responses might be triggered. And so in the workshop, that might look like some defensiveness or dismissing arguments, making rationalizations, or disengaging. These behaviors are meant to prevent us from feeling that discomfort, allow us to avoid the discomfort, and help us return to being more comfortable, which we're biologically set up to do, to avoid distress or discomfort. But also recognizing that those responses can likely hinder our growth and impede our ability to learn and learn new ways of operating. So as Christine mentioned before, it's important to acknowledge and address these reactions when they're present, and we can do that by remaining curious about them. So we might ask ourselves some questions when we're noticing those responses coming up, trying to understand maybe where it's coming from, what it's indicating, maybe giving ourselves permission to sit with that discomfort, noticing the urges to disengage or urges to justify, and maybe practice resisting some of those urges or trying a different response. And again, all of this is an effort to create openness for new information and more self-discovery.
Okay, so we're asking you to do all of these things, remain open and do lots of self-reflection. And so our commitment to you is that we are going to continue to do our own anti-racist work between now and in the fall when we reconnect. And obviously that's not going to stop after that, after our series, and anti-racist work is a continuous growth process. We're also committed to fully engaging in this process by participating in this work together with you. We're not claiming to know everything, and we hope to learn and grow with you all in this process as well. And then the next part is expectations for participation. We hope that you all come prepared. Sometimes I don't know if you can all relate where you're running from meeting to meeting and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot this was on my schedule. I'm just gonna show up and respond to emails and whatever. We hope that you can take some time to mentally prepare for coming to this, because some of this work and what we're asking you to do is going to be difficult, and we want you to be fully present to the experience to get the most out of it. And so that might look like minimizing distractions, muting your email, etc. And then again, as I think this is the most important part and why we're saying it so frequently, is to challenge the temptation to withdraw from those difficult emotions. And we'll really try to work with you all to approach it with curiosity. And this will hopefully be helpful to become a better ally.
Mm-hmm. So 2 more slides, and then we definitely want to open up for conversation for everybody. As we've been talking about, right, like why us, who are we to have these conversations? We recognize that part of the growth process, which can sometimes be activating of those defenses, is to be brought into when we make mistakes. So what we want to name is that in this presentation and any other future workshops that are connected with social justice and the anti-racist framework that we're a part of with all of you, that we are open to feedback. We want you to share with us if we've made a misstep, if you saw something that we missed in a group that was another person's misstep, and it's difficult to imagine giving them that feedback because maybe you're just forming a relationship with them, or you want to kind of practice what it could be like to talk about it in this observation of white supremacy playing out before going back into the conversation. But we want to name that part, and this is another aspect of what we're committed to doing. And so this is an explicit invitation for you to tell us when we make a mistake, because blind spots are part of this work, and how do we see them? And there's a possibility that it is a complete blind spot to us or to any one of us. And without that feedback and realizing the risk it would take to give us that feedback, but know that it would actually enhance the relationships that we're forming with all of you. And if anybody else would be interested in participating in these things, it enhances our relationship, and it hopefully will feel like it increases your respect for us and our respect for you with being that direct in the process. So just want to name that. And then the last piece is we want to give credit where it is due. And these are some primary contributors to the work that we've been doing specifically in relation to this workshop preparation. Resma Manikim as a mental health therapist and also the author of My Grandmother's Hands. Dr. Annalise Singh is I believe now she's a dean or an associate dean. I can't recall. At what university is in Tulane? Does anybody remember? Yeah. No, I see you typing, or maybe you're looking it up. Well, we'll come back to it. Anyway, so they are a counseling psychologist. That's why I have such an affinity for them. I think many folks are familiar with Dr. Kendi and the work that he's doing with anti-racism and educating the world. And then Dr. Vincent DeHealy what is his position, Christine?
He is still currently the group's coordinator at North Carolina University and holds a lot of the white fragility workshops and things of that nature.
Yeah, so
structures.
We want to give credit to those folks who are supportive, or to our work, even if they didn't know it. But all right, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and I guess what I'm curious about for folks is maybe just initial reactions or thoughts about this. And maybe we can even practice reflecting on what emotions are coming up for you in this moment. If you want to take a risk and share, again, chat, or you can unmute yourself. So Rebecca, thanks for asking, is there an opportunity for in-person workshops? Don, this would probably be where I would loop you into this, because my knee-jerk reaction is that my preference would be that these are in person. if nothing more than to have decreased distractions, but I also realize like we're partnering with your office. So what would that look like?
I would say that we are open to all possibilities in the fall, but as people say, the virus gets a vote. So I think that if things continue to improve, I think making this an in-person workshop is great. The only issue we have with in-person workshops is people's ability to make those. But I think if that's what we think is going to work best for this, we can make that happen, provided that's a possibility at that time.
And I could also imagine, because sort of how we were envisioning it too, so there's the four of us, and we being like small group leaders essentially, but the hierarchy being very flat in that conversation. So if it's what to me is most important are people's involvement in the workshop rather than like you have to be able to make it in person. So there could be a possibility where one or two of us offer virtual and the other two offer one or two or three or two offer an in-person option. So
my biggest concern about doing in-person workshops would be for our colleagues who are not on Manhattan campus, having a little bit harder time to do that. So that's one of the reasons we've had these over Zoom as long as we have. But if we're going to offer certain ones, or as someone just said in the chat, possibly having them be hybrid, that is a possibility I think that we could pursue. I think the thing about this, and as you're asking for emotional reactions, this is going to be hard, right? This is going to be some heavy lifting for all people who are involved in this if they're really going to get something out of this. So I think if we're going to do them in the way that allows that hard work to be easiest, is kind of my first kind of reaction to this. I worry about attrition. I worry about people kind of coming in and saying, oh my God, this is more than I expected to have to do, especially because a lot of this work, and I've read many of the books that you've mentioned as well, they challenge people who think they're already doing a good job. And, as Kendi says in his book, anti-racism isn't who you are, it's what you do every single moment. And you have to continually make that decision every single moment. Do I do the racist thing or the anti-racist thing? And there is no neutral. So there's a lot of heavy lifting that goes on in there. So I'm excited, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, but I think it's going to be an amazing thing for the fall.
Thanks. And LaBarbara, I appreciate your comment in the chat as well. So. And can you remind me what IDI stands for, LaBarbara?
Okay. Intercultural Development Inventory.
Thank you.
And so a number of us are trained in that area on campus, and we do a very similar scenario of experiences with students who sign up or with faculty. And so recognizing the things that you're talking about right now at the front end of your workshop is really important. People are not comfortable sharing innermost feelings that they hide every day. Making people comfortable at the very beginning of that workshop is going to be important. So icebreakers, things that make people realize that there is similarities as much as appreciating differences is so important. Because I think that's where we get lost in the thorns. And I really like what you're trying to do on campus. However, I can help. I would love to do that.
Thank you. Yes.
But that's what IDI stands for. That's
I appreciate that a lot. And like this what you just offered is a perfect example. Like this stuff is happening on campus. So we know this isn't novel and amazing and we're trailblazers or anything. It's just how do we get us all into the same space and to be able to have those conversations. Yes. Oh, Trevor, such a good point. And I love that note of how do we get maybe people who are not quite so outspoken to talk about some of these things. Yeah. And one other piece that we have also been kicking around, but we didn't have specifics identified to offer, was for those of you who are interested or have colleagues who you think would be interested in doing this, even if they aren't connected directly with the TLC, is to like we're kind of, this is fantasy, so don't hold me to it. It's like creating like a Canvas page where we give you like summer homework to do in preparation for the fall semester. And it's not like a requirement or even something that you have to post publicly, like discussion boards or anything, but just things to get you thinking and to get some of the scaffolding built for these difficult conversations. Yes, yeah, that's always the benefit, right, of the deeper thinkers. So. Yes, Sarah, and we'll talk about those too. I'd like, because it's not just white identity development or Black identity development. You get lots of stuff. Very.
I just want to say, Kodee, thank you. And thank you to all your team for taking the initiative, because this is so important work and it's not easy and it's not comfortable. But I think just providing the space and the opportunity for people that want to grow, right? Because I think we have different pockets across the campus that people are trying to provide opportunities for growth and capacity for skill development in this area. But I really appreciate that you guys are doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. And thanks for putting that in the chat and then unmuting to share that directly. It's always good to hear your voice.
Yes, and also, you know, if you need any collaboration from me, I'm happy to help too.
Yeah,
if needed.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, that was one thing that we had also talked about. And colleagues, feel free to jump in. I mean, but we had talked about, you know, the reality that we are like white European descent women. So how do we engage conversations with Latina or Latinx populations or Black African American identities and it feel like it can be a safe conversation without it overburdening, you know, our colleagues of color who are often the person who gets picked to do all of the DEI activities. So I appreciate you being explicit in that invitation, Rebecca, and LaBarbara as well. Tiffany, I'm reading your comment. In content of the workshops. We can keep you in the loop, Tiffany. So I don't know how in this moment, but I will not forget that you're going to be finished. So also congratulations. Isn't this your doctoral degree, Tiffany? Yay!
Yes, it is. Yeah, thank
Dr.
you.
Lawless, woo! Awesome. Yeah.
I wrote in the chat that self-identity is very complicated because some of it's defined by your cultural or socioeconomic experience, and that gets confused sometimes with who you are. I find that skin color is not necessarily the definer. And I say that because that's the obvious thing. What you look like is how you get categorized. But there are a number of people who are well educated, speak a certain way, and are chastised within their own race because they're not seen as Black enough or whatever term you want to say. And I think that makes it complicated on first glance at individuals as to where they stand or how you evaluate them. And sometimes people who are in those situations don't recognize that even for themselves. That's how they define themselves.
Yeah.
So when you start talking about identity, there'll be a backlash because they don't see themselves as the way that you might see them, even when that's evident. So being able to sift through people's self-perception is very complicated.
Yeah. And I read a book by a woman named Margot Jefferson called Negro Land. And this, I think, speaks really well to the content that she wrote about. And she, I think she grew up in the 70s and 80s. I think my timeline is right. But it's just, she just talks about it of like, how do you, you know, for her parents who were trying to break into a white supremacist system, trying to then take on the cultural norms of whiteness, and then their children finding that attempt to break in by taking on whiteness didn't work. So why am I going to keep trying if it doesn't happen? And then it becoming an intergenerational challenge of navigating those things and then ultimately coming to a different place than her parents did. So I really liked it. She's a journalist and would highly recommend that book. Jack, you asked a question. Link to the workshop series that can share with others who may be interested. They can definitely watch this session when it gets posted. And then we'll also be connecting with Don and the other folks with the TLC to set up maybe like a Qualtrics or some sort of survey for people who would be interested so we can stay in contact with them. So
I think there's also, and I just heard this recently, I never thought much about it, but white young women and men who want to be Black, who want to wear the dreads and they want that identity as well, you know, and how you perceive those folks is really important as well, because it complicated the other direction.
right. And it's like, is it cultural respect and interest, or is it cultural appropriation? So, yeah. We have about 5 minutes left with our time. So, colleagues, any thoughts or things that you're coming up for you right now?
I just appreciate you all coming and asking questions and engaging with us, and I hope to see everyone maybe in the fall.
I also just kind of I was reading the chat, when you asked that question, Kodee, my mind immediately went to the chat, but a lot of, a comment that Stuart Miller made about, you know, a lot of people are motivated to do the work, but a lot of people are not, you know, as teachers, the difficulty in trying to motivate people with even the idea of doing the work is uncomfortable. And you know what, in a way, I think the more that people come in and do the work, the closer they might have closer proximity to people who are not quite ready to do that work yet, and have that opportunity to take what they have learned and kind of plant those seeds, and hopefully something can grow as that. So, you know, as teachers, continuing to work on yourself and then your proximity, how close you are to other students and other people in your lives, gives that opportunity to plant those seeds. So.
Jack, is Jack raising a hand?
Yes.
Yes, so thank you all for your presentation today. I just had a general question, and I might have missed the answer to this, you might have already said it, but is there a max number of people who could be involved in this? I'm definitely wanting to be, but I just want to make sure I'm not gonna get like a whole horde of graduate students involved and there's like a limited space, but.
That's funny. I see you all looking at me like I'm going to have an answer to this question, and I don't.
I will say that, I mean, obviously infinity is too many, but I will say doing work on this as our campus has tried to do over the last several years. I can say that I can't think of an exception, that if people have wanted to get the training or get access to the information, there's been space for that. So I think this is something that we are committed to doing, committed to providing. And there will be, I will say, lots of space for people who want to join. I can't say exactly what that capacity will be, but I would imagine we're not going to be turning people away from this. Yes, infinity and bond, as Rebecca said. So Buzz Lightyear will get a co-authorship on this.
Right. Any last thoughts? Because this feels like sort of a natural place to wrap up. Thank you for coming. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for providing some information about the workshop series that's going to come this fall. And I look very much forward to us getting ready to actually provide those workshops. So a lot of the logistical details that people have questions about, we haven't created. As they are created, we will put out the information in lots of ways. You'll see it in K-State today. You'll see it over our social media. We'll do lots of different things. We'll send it out to the emails of listeners that we have. So we're going to get a lot of things out there for you so that you can be ready to do this if you want to do this, and we hope you want to do this. So please join me one more time in thanking our team who came in today to talk to us about the upcoming workshops on allyship and antiracism. And please don't leave just yet, just a couple of announcements. First of all, there's a post-event survey that my colleagues are going to drop in the chat if you'd like to provide your perceptions of this event and give any ideas for us. We also have a professional development series certificate that you can earn either as a graduate teaching assistant or a faculty or staff member. The information for that is going to be put by my colleagues in the chat as well. We're also pretty soon accepting applications to become a TLC fellow, which is kind of a cool thing. And then you might contribute to our professional development series next year. And we have information for that, and we're always willing to take questions. My last two plugs, we have our first ever Teaching and Learning Center Scholarship for Teaching and Learning Showcase. We'll be collecting abstracts. Those are due by Monday, April 11th. The Qualtrics link we're going to drop into the chat. And that session itself will happen on Monday, May 9th in the afternoon in the Hale Room 181. But that information is again available on our social media. And then my final announcement is that next week we'll be having another wonderful session called Practicing Gratitude, a student well-being workshop led by Chris Bowman and Greg Eislein, and we hope that you see you then. So thank you so much for being part of our event today, and I hope you have a magical afternoon.